Welcome to the Relationship Series podcast. My name is Ankush Jain, and each episode I'll be speaking to a different state of mind expert on the subject of relationships. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 24 of the Relationship Series. This week I'm joined by Dr. Amy Johnson, who is a psychologist, coach, and author of several books, including Being Human, essays on Thoughtmares, Bouncing Back, and Your True Nature, and the upcoming The Little Book of Big Change, a no willpower approach to break any habit. Amy's got an impressive CV. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, The Steve Harvey Show, Self Magazine, and Oprah.com. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Some guests I know well, some we don't. We don't know each other too well, although I've heard lots about you, and I've got your book next to me over here, Being Human, which I've heard great things about as well. But I'd love, in your words, just to hear a little bit about your background and what's brought you to us maybe talking today, and also your journey on this path.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I always tell people I kind of like came out of the womb like curious about life and relationships, or that's the way it felt anyway. Kind of just even as a really young kid, seeing a lot of tension and dysfunctional relationships around me and stuff. I was just always very curious about why these adults seem to have such a hard time in life at times. You know, why me and my little sister could play and have fun and life seemed so easy, but to the adults around us, it was like a lot of pain and struggle and conflict, you know, and I just knew something changes when you grow up, you know, something happens. And I was really curious about what that was. So I was reading, you know, like self-help type books and Wayne Dyer and all of that stuff when I was very young, probably 10, 11. And I studied psychology in college and studied psychology in graduate school. And as I just kind of, you know, learned more, I obviously, you know, things evolved and kind of changed, and it became less about me trying to kind of get in everyone's head and figure things out, and just more about, you know, looking at how people come to really just feel free, to kind of have that feeling that we do all have as young children, where you just wake up and you just go through your day and life is good and you're hopeful about things. And so, yeah, for me, it's just been a lifelong journey of being curious about life and how our mind works and all of that. And I'm really honored and happy to be able to do it as a career now. Yeah,
that's great. And I'm sitting here thinking that's impressive. You were reading those books at such a young age. I probably got to them maybe 10 years after you did.
I don't know if it's impressive. It might be might be a little sad. It's something, though.
Well, it's interesting. There's so many people. You know, there's a huge industry in this, in kind of the self-help world, if you like, and I know I've got some involvement in that. And was there a certain point where something changed, and you saw something deeper, or are you just still very much searching, or is it both?
Yeah, well, it's both. I definitely had those moments where everything changed, you know, almost kind of like, it's such a weird thing, you know, it's strange to talk about it as like, you know, getting to another level, but it's sort of like that, you know. I think there was a lot of searching in the beginning of, okay, how can I make sure I'm happy, and how can I make sure that doesn't happen to me, where I'm stressed all the time and in all this conflict, and it was a searching thing, and then there were just sort of moments and periods where it was like, okay, I see something new, like I get it, and then of course you don't really get it, because then there's always more to see. So there were definitely a lot of those. I mean, when I was 16, I had an experience where it was it lasted, I don't know, probably a week. I mean, I was just on this enormous high. It was straight, but it didn't feel like a high. It just felt like I was seeing life really accurately for the first time in my life. And it's funny, I remember being 16, and I remember watching Seinfeld, which was on, and it wasn't reruns, it was actually on at that time, and just thinking, you know, like it was nothing, just thinking, I could write a show like this. I could do that. Like, it was like anything was open to me. I had no fear. I went back to high school after this experience and was like talking to people that I would normally never talk with, and like something really shifted. And then like I said, it lasted maybe a week or two, and then I kind of gradually, like, my old thinking came back, so then it was like a whole search of, well, where did that go and what was that, and then more recently, in the past 20 years since then, there have been equivalent things like that, similar things where you kind of see things, you got to get the sense that you're seeing more accurately and more clearly. And then old thinking, I think, tends to kind of come back. But I think what we see in those moments isn't totally gone. There's a part of it that sticks with you. So it's a really interesting journey. And what I found personally is I can take it very seriously. And I did at times, and think, oh, well, what was that I experienced at 16, and why don't I have it now? And I want my whole life to be like that, and it's not fair. Or you can just, and that causes a lot of suffering, or you can just be in it, be grateful for what you've seen and what you continue to see, and be curious about what you don't see, and try to take it less seriously. And I think it's a lot more fun that way.
Now, I know you work with a bunch of different people, and this episode and this series is all about relationships. So I would love if you could share with us some of the insights you've had either in your relationships or anything that you've helped your clients to see that could be helpful for our listeners.
Yeah. I think it's, for me, a huge thing, like I was saying, kind of being a kid and seeing a lot of conflict and a lot of things not go well in relationships around me. I think it's so natural for all of us, especially as a young kid, though, to kind of take things personally. Like we are the center of our universe, and that really never changes. A lot of time, unfortunately, even as adults, it's like we have so much thinking that's about us and our place in the world and what it all means about us and what it all means for us. And we do so much of that thinking that's just centered on us. And so when it comes to relationships, it's so easy for us to kind of make everything be about us and take things really personally. And so I remember, even as a kid, it's like my parents were getting divorced and people weren't always getting along and all of that. Like, at first it just seemed like, okay, I don't know what their problem is. Why can't they just figure this out and be happy? But before long it became like, well, am I doing something wrong? Like, what does this have to do with me? And where's my place in this? And all of that self-focus. And I see that with the people I talk with today. And I see it in my own relationships today show up, as a thought in my head, like, oh, this is about me, or what did I do here? And I think that's been one of the hugest lessons, is to see that what other people do, what they think, what they say, it's not really about us. It's, even when they say it's about us, even when it is about us in content, when someone's saying you did something wrong or you should be different, it's about the person thinking that. That's just the way that things look to them in that moment, from their own state of mind and their own thinking that they're getting, and their own, all the, huge baggage of thoughts that they carry around with them and take as truth. And so, really just started to hit me, throughout life, and the biggest thing in relationships is, for me still, is just kind of seeing that people are going to see things the way they see them, and that's just the way they see them in that moment. It doesn't mean they're going to see it that way tomorrow, and it isn't really about me or the things that they're judging. It's just a reflection of their state of mind in the moment.
So what would you say to someone that, or someone might be listening to this and they might be thinking, well, what if there is someone in their life that thinks a certain way about them, and maybe that they might be doing something to encourage that feeling, or I guess where does responsibility and kind of ownership of that, of how we impact other people come into that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's, and it's a tough thing to kind of describe in words sometimes, but here's kind of how I see it. So I'll give a personal example from my life. So I grew up with a father who had as all human beings do, had a lot of thinking, right? But a lot of kind of insecurities. I mean, I can kind of look back, and again, this is not him. I mean, we all have a lot of insecurities. I think sometimes, given the upbringing we have, or the past we have, or just what we understand about life, unfortunately, some people take those insecurities as gospel truth, or it's just like everything that the way they see things is just the way they see things, black and white, and there's really no room to see things in a different way. And so it was kind of one of these relationships growing up where I was responsible for his happiness in a sense. Of course, I wasn't really, but that was, it was like if I was good, then he was going to be nice. If he was in a bad place or in a bad mood or didn't feel like talking or felt like lashing out that day, it was because of me. It was the way that he put it, like I wasn't being good enough or I was being bad, So it was just almost like this constant walking on eggshells type of feeling. And it's very easy for a child to take that on, like, okay, well, I have to be good in order to like make sure he has a good day, and for me to have a good day, because if there's a fight, then my day's ruined, and it's just a very, very messy thing. So for sure, I think there is room, and that's kind of maybe an extreme example for a lot of people to relate to, or maybe not, I don't know, but there's definitely a place, for us to kind of look at, okay, where's my role in this? What am I possibly doing to make this worse? But I think we see that when our own mind is a little cleaner. So what I mean by that is, like, when I was really caught up in, oh my gosh, if Dad he hasn't talked to me in a week, I must have written something horrible. This is all my fault. What am I going to do to get him to talk to me again? When I was all wrapped up in that, it was almost impossible for me to see around it, because my head was very full of all of that stuff. I was feeling the guilt. I was feeling the responsibility. I was making a lot of assumptions about how he was feeling and what I had done. And, and just it's very messy and very crowded in my own head. And so when that's the case for any of us, I think it's just we get really caught up in that. And it's very hard to see around that. But as I was on this path of kind of seeing, okay, what is mine and what is his? And I started to see, okay, yes, I have a responsibility in life for sure to be the best person I can be and just be true to myself and all of that. But a lot of this stuff that's happening is his stuff. As I let him have it and I stopped taking it all so personally and trying to figure it all out so much, my head got clearer and I could hear my own wisdom around things. And I definitely saw, okay, Amy, there are things you do that set him off. Now, we're not talking about blame here. Like, should he have been set off? I don't know. There's, it's not about a should or a blame or anything, but I would have my own little insights about that. Like, okay, when you say things this way, or when he's in this state of mind, or you kind of sense this mood about him, the best thing to do is just stay back. Just don't do anything there. Or here's a good thing to do. Maybe you could go approach him and like try to lighten the mood when things are like this. And so these are all really specific examples, but they weren't things I had to figure out. That's the point, and I think that's the point for everyone to kind of see. We aren't going to figure it out with our heads so much. But as we start to see that other people's reactions and thinking and emotions are about them in the moment and they aren't really about us, it frees us up so much that we can have insights like that. And that's when it became a little easier to navigate, all the conflict and drama.
As you were speaking, it kind of just occurred to me that so many times, we can concentrate on our behavior and we can concentrate on what to do in our relationships. And what I heard from what you were saying is actually, look at our state of mind, look at where we're coming from. And I was thinking, well, isn't it interesting if you were coming from a place of compassion, you may change your behavior, that might make sense to you. And if you're coming from a place of guilt, you might also change your behavior. But they're two very different state of minds and probably have a very different outcome.
Absolutely. And yeah, for sure. And what I kind of, the thing that occurs to me in that is it's natural to come from a place of compassion when our mind is a little clearer. Like, And we're kind of talking about the same thing. It's like, well, what is compassion? It's kind of a clear head in a sense. It's what's there when we aren't so caught up in the details and when we aren't taking things so personally. So, and maybe vice versa. Maybe if we set out to come from a place of compassion, our head naturally settles down. I think it probably kind of works in both ways. But yeah, seeing that it wasn't all about me. For me, this is just kind of how it occurred to me on my path. It's like seeing, okay, this isn't about me. This is about him. It just settled my mind down so much. And yes, compassion was a lot closer to the surface in those times. And it was never perfect, and still isn't. When I have a lot of thinking about this relationship or about anything, compassion's further away. And the really simple, beautiful thing is to kind of to start to see that. And now I know when I'm not feeling compassion for someone, when there's something like this going on and compassion just is nowhere to be found, I know I have a lot on my mind. It becomes a really easy rule of thumb. If you're not feeling kind of peaceful and hopeful and compassionate, you just don't even see those anywhere around, your head's full of stuff. You're just in a low state of mind yourself. And so, like you're saying, you just take a break. Like, that's probably not the time to make a bunch of decisions and go have a conversation and do a lot of stuff. It's the time to just kind of wait until you're feeling a little bit better, and then different options and possibilities are going to come up for you, and compassion's most likely going to be one of those.
One of the things that I get asked most often by people is, okay, so I understand what you're saying. We make better decisions with a quieter mind. We've got these emotions on natural, kind of compassion, creativity, curiosity, when we've got a quiet state of mind. And the question I invariably get asked is, so what do I do about it? And I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that question.
So what you don't do about it is try really hard to get there. That adds more noise to the system. I think it just, and that's what I did for most of my life, is try really hard to get there. Oh, how do I get there? How do I, or making myself feel compassion, or, pushing really hard and trying to make a relationship kind of look the way that our head thinks it should look. So you don't want to do that. So I can say, this has been a big thing for me, and especially in this relationship with my dad, is that I've had I've put a lot of pressure on myself, given my line of work, and that I've spent my whole life looking at these things. I've put a lot of pressure on myself, wait a minute, why can't I get this relationship right? Why is there not a lot of compassion there on my part more of the time? What does that mean about me? What's wrong with me? What am I not seeing here? And what it really comes down to, I think, is that we're human beings. We are always doing the best that we can. And you are not going to be in a clear-minded, compassionate place all of the time, and it's okay. When we're not there, it's okay. It just means that you're just being very human in that moment, right? You just have stuff on your mind, and we can try to understand life more deeply and understand how the mind works, and those are wonderful things, and it definitely helps. But it doesn't make you immune to being human, and thank God, we don't want that. So you're still going to have moments where you're just not seeing clearly, and you have a lot on your mind, and that's okay. And being okay with those times, this feels like such a cop-out answer to your question, but it's being okay with those times tends to make them come around a little less. Or even if they are there, even if you do have long periods of time where you have a lot on your mind, you're in a low state of mind, however you want to say it just affects you less because you kind of know what it is. It's all right, well, I have a lot on my mind right now, and it just makes it more of a non-issue. So you're right. I mean, I think I get that question a lot, just like you said, everybody's like, well, how do I get to that clear place? What do I do? How do I make that more likely? And it's a little bit of a paradox in a sense, because in a sense, there's nothing you can do to make it happen, but But you can keep looking, and you can kind of relax into it a little bit more. And that sort of solves the issue from both angles. I think it does make it more likely that your mind settles down and you see something. But it also makes it so that even when that's not the case, even when you have a lot on your mind, it's just not as big of a deal. And I think the huge thing is just not pushing. I used to push so much, and right now, in this relationship, I don't have a relationship with my father right now. His choice, although I have the sense for sure that maybe I could call him and make something be different. Maybe if I showed up at his door and said the right things could be different. But those are thoughts I have about this. But the fact is, I'm not doing that right now. It just doesn't feel like the thing to do. And in the past, I would have said, oh my gosh, well, what's wrong with you? You don't have a relationship with your father. Do something about it. Make it happen. And in fact, that's what I did for 35 years of my life. Make sure that relationship was intact. And I can just say at this point, given that I'm not pushing anymore, I'm at a place of waiting for something that just feels right to kind of come to the surface and trusting that it will if it's time to. I'm not doing anything right now, but I just know, if there's something that needs to be done or that I want to do, it's going to occur to me. It's going to happen at some point, and if it doesn't, if that means that I still just have a lot of my mind around this, well, I'm human. I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah, no, I like the way that you put that about we're human. And I know some people or some of my clients initially when we start talking, there is a misunderstanding that if you get this, whatever this is, then you'll never have those human moments. Yeah. And one thing I have to kind of make it clear is that that's not on offer. That's not part of the service, because we all get caught out. And like you say, that is human, and I don't know anyone who doesn't get caught out. And what I tend to find is that I get caught out a little bit less than I used to. But there's no relevant to I might get caught out about the smallest thing, or the smallest, the most irrelevant thing, but then handle, which is tends to happen, but the biggest thing tends to be just handled. And there's just kind of no logic to that, or it's not what we think. We think we'd get caught out about the bigger stuff, but we just tend to get caught out less. And what I find is that when initially, I don't know if you find this too, but initially if I'll say to someone, you don't need to do anything about being caught out, at least you don't need to do anything about that on the level of your thinking. You don't need to think more about it. And sometimes people don't like the answer, but when I ask them, have they tried it, they'll say, well, no, I'm too busy trying to work out what to do.
Right.
And it's so right. Common for us to. It's not that we're upset or depressed or anything. It's because we think being upset or depressed is a problem.
Exactly. I heard this from Dr. Bill Pettit recently. He said, human beings are the only animals that when we're lost, we speed up. Every other animal, if they're lost, they slow down or stop and regain their bearings, or however, they wait for their instincts to show up and kind of show them the next step. And it's so logical. It makes so much sense in nature. Of course they would. You imagine a lost animal that's running around crazy, but you can imagine that with a human because that's what we do, And so I think, so you're right. It's not on offer to never be human. And I think, thank God, we signed up to come into these human bodies and have this experience. So we're going to get caught up. And I can say with some certainty that I'm caught up on some level around this relationship with my dad. I am, because I don't feel constant compassion. I forgive him, I love him, but it's I know there's stuff there, but it's so different to be caught up and just know it and to be okay with it and to say, you know what, at some point I hope this clears. I just would love to see this more clearly at some point, but there's nothing I can do to make that happen. And the more I try, the more lost and caught up I'm going to get.
You mentioned forgiveness, and I know that's something that comes up a lot in relationships where we think we've been hard done by or we have conflict with another person. So what's your take on forgiveness?
I think think forgiveness is totally natural. It's like, it's not an action. It's just where we find ourselves when we see that there's nothing really to forgive. So, when we see, like in my example, my dad just sees things the way that he sees them. It's not wrong. I mean, I wish it were different. It's created some suffering in his life. I know that. And so I wish it were different for him as well, for his sake and for my sake and for my kids' sake. And, but there's nothing, it's not like he's wanting to see life the way he sees it. And no one would. No one wants to suffer. We aren't self-sabotaging people. Like, just the opposite. We're always doing the best we can to feel the best we can. And sometimes we do a really crappy job at that. Like, we just don't see that clearly, So we get ourselves into messes and we cut ourselves off from people. But it's still because we're just trying to feel good. It's still just a innocent human being doing the best they can, So if we believe that someone is maliciously, out to hurt us, then forgiveness is something we need to muster up. But I think as you come to see that we're all just seeing the world the way that we see it, and there's room to see it in a better way, perhaps, but we're not doing this to ourselves on purpose. No one is holding themselves back from people they love on purpose just to hurt them. Then I don't know, that forgiveness almost becomes like a non-issue. Like there's nothing to forgive. It's more like feeling compassion for that person or feeling empathy for them. But it's not about like me saying, okay, I say it's okay that you do what you do, which is sort of how I see forgiveness in a sense.
And that's so different to I guess how most people view forgiveness. And I know when I was younger, probably my teenage years and maybe at the start of my 20s, I used to think that not forgiving someone was strength, and that if I forgave them, then that would mean that I was weak or that they would walk all over me. And I don't think like that anymore. But what would you say to someone who thinks like that forgiving someone would mean that they'd get walked all over?
Yeah, it's so common. I mean, I think it's just two separate things. Like, I think that you can see that someone is just seeing the world the way that they see it. And sometimes, and when we're hurting or we're feeling really insecure, we tend to hurt other people. Like that's, when people are being mean, it's coming from insecurity or from their own pain or whatever. So we can kind of see that and just naturally forgive people because there's nothing to forgive. They're just doing what it hurts them to do. And separately, we can not be walked all over. It's a separate thing. It's like, I'm not going to, it doesn't make sense to invite someone into your life who you feel constantly bad around, or who is doing things that, obviously we feel our own thinking, but it's like there's that part of life too that's just kind of common sense. It's like, well, why would you put yourself in the path of something that does nothing but create suffering for you? So you can set a boundary, or however people say it, you kind of stand up for yourself in that way, in a very loving way that doesn't make them wrong. They're just doing what's for them to do. It's all about you. It's about, this is what feels right to me in my life. For some people, it's like, well, this is what feels right to me is to end this relationship. And I love you and wish you well. It's not your fault, but it's just what feels right. It's again really kind of like you were saying about compassion and coming from a different state of mind. I think when we're in a good place, that's just natural for us to see that. We can all look back, and in fact, think back to your first love or some tumultuous relationship you had when you were pretty young. I mean, there was so much emotion, and a lot of times you break up on bad terms and all of that, when you're young. And then a couple decades later, you look back with such fondness on that relationship. It's almost never that people still he deserved this, or you just don't look back years later on that kind of thing. I think it's just what naturally happens. Your mind clears, your thinking clears around it a little bit. You're not all caught up in the personal thinking, and you just see a different perspective. So hopefully we don't have to have decades go by to reach that point. We don't have to. If you kind of have this perspective, you can see it in all of your relationships. It's like the way I always think of it, it's like, I wish you well, and I don't really want to see you today. It's not a bad thing. It's just what feels right for me.
I was delivering a training course about 10 days ago, and someone was getting caught up in their head, and one of the other people in the room said, you can't think this one to the ground. And I really loved that, because like you say, we think what we think and we feel what we feel, and when we've got a clear head, things just become obvious to us, and it's so natural for us to try and think it to the ground. Let me try and wrestle this with more and more thinking, and it's not only unhelpful. It's completely the wrong direction. It's kind of doing the opposite of what's going to help.
But we're really used to thinking, and it really looks like, and we've kind of been told that, like, you think it through and use your head and all of that stuff, so it's so innocent that we try to do that. But I just love, I think that's one of the just most simple, most helpful messages that comes out of, these interviews that you do and all of this kind of work, is that, like, we can't think things to the ground. It doesn't work that way. In fact, it's just the opposite.
So what about kind of in romantic relationships where, people fall out of love and they have little conflicts, or they get upset about, something small, like you didn't take out you call it trash, we call it rubbish in the UK.
Yeah.
And how does this help with those kind of either small issues or kind of larger issues of, I don't know if I'm in love with you anymore?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's funny because those things look so night and day different, but it's almost like if there's a approach to this, which I wouldn't usually call it an approach, but like if somebody has that issue, my husband never takes out the rubbish, or I'm not sure I'm in love with him anymore, the answer is kind of the same thing in both cases. It's like, well, wait till your thinking settles down around it, and something's gonna show up. It sounds crazy even now for me to say this as we're talking, but because it sounds so hands off, and people are just so used to having to take charge and do something. But it's like, if you don't know, or if you're not sure, or if you're in any state of uncertainty, what are you going to do? You can flip a coin and do something just to get yourself moving. And in fact, that's what a lot of people do, because it feels better to them to move. They can tell themselves, I'm making progress, I'm doing something about this, and being in that state of uncertainty is so uncomfortable for so many people, just because they have a lot of thinking when they're there. But truly, if you don't know what to do, or you're just not sure about something, I mean, doesn't it just make sense to wait until you're a little more sure? And people will say, well, I'll wait forever, I'll be in limbo forever. No, not really. That doesn't really happen. It really doesn't. Kind of like you were saying earlier, like, well, have you tried it? Have you tried not pushing? I think a lot of times we don't try waiting for more certainty. We're in such a rush to get out of that feeling that we're creating with our own thinking that we just pick something and do it, and it gets us deeper into trouble, it just gets us further gone. So, not really, but it adds more thinking to it, and it makes it look even more confusing. So it's like, well, just wait. And I always picture, I don't know if, I've probably heard this somewhere, I don't think I made this up, but I'm sure someone out there talks about this, but like my children play in the sandbox a lot, or play at the beach, and they have those little sifters, where you put the sand in and the rocks and all the twigs and everything stay in it and all the sand runs through. I always picture one of those where it's like, just wait. Your thinking is going to be running through that little sifter, and it's going to run through and run through and run through, and all your thinking, if you just leave it alone, it's going to settle down at some point. And there's going to be something left in there. It's either or nothing. You can either have an open space where some wisdom or something that feels more true can come in, or there's going to be something in there that's a little more substantial than all of that thinking, and so it's like, if we just let our thinking run its course, something tends to rise to the surface, and that, it just tends to be something that's a little more helpful or more trustworthy.
Yeah, I'm sitting here smiling because what I realized kind of last year was when I know, I just know. When I'm certain of something, I'm certain. And we can justify any action when we're certain of it. We can justify any decision, whether it's staying with someone or leaving someone, whether it's staying with a job or leaving a job, whether it's to go on holiday or to stay and paint and decorate the house. When we know, when we've made our decision, we're just certain of it. We just know, and it's never an issue. And like you say, when you're confused or you're not certain, you've got every single possibility open in front of you. And I was just kind of smiling to myself because it reminded me of the fact of, you know, what I've started to do, like you say, is just leave it and let it settle. And when the answer comes, it comes. And like you say, it's so different. It sounds so unusual for us to say this because it's so different to certainly what I had read and listened and understood up until a few years ago.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about your children. How does this affect your relationships with your kids? You said as well when you were younger, you saw adults as having issues and you couldn't understand because you were enjoying yourself. And I wonder how this now relates to your own children.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. I mean, so from my perspective, it's been so wonderful to have young children. Mine are very young still, so they're still in that place where they just wake up happy and go to bed happy, you know. And of course, they have moods and they have all kinds of roller coaster stuff during the day. But you know, there's just that lightness and that just sense of ease and hopefulness about life. And there's never any question that things are going to just be fine for them underneath whatever emotions they're feeling. And just as a parent, to be able to be around that every day, I mean, that's amazing. You know, it's like living with like your own little gurus. You know, they always remind me. And so and from that perspective, it's great. You know, it's great for me personally. You know, and I think that my experiences and kind of having I wouldn't by any stretch say I had like a tough childhood, but just, you know, just seeing the stuff that you see, I think hopefully it's helped me to kind of be a little more sensitive to how children kind of think about things sometimes and how they pick up the thinking patterns of the adults around them or get curious about that. And so I don't know for sure, but maybe I'm a little more attuned to that too. Like sometimes I will see my 5-year-old especially look kind of confused if I'm like rushing around in the morning, kind of stressed out, you know, and she's just playing happily and she knows everything's going to be fine. She kind of look at me like, what are you rushing for? You know, and I think maybe because I remember that feeling as a kid, thinking that about my own parents, you know, it kind of clues me in a little faster. And I'm like, oh yeah, what am I rushing for? Or I can rush with a smile on my face. Like this doesn't have to be a tense moment, you know? And so it's interesting. I don't know, you know, it's such a great question. And I'm sure there's so many ways that it all kind of plays out that I'm not even aware of. But I just do know that I'm so blessed to have these little people around because they're such great reminders of what it used to be like and what it can be like.
Yeah, so many of the people that I've interviewed for this series, you know, say the same thing, whether they've got children or now grandchildren, who are their biggest teachers, and how I think it was about 3 years ago that I first read something by someone who teaches or uses this understanding, and reading something they've written about how children are in perfect mental health, and I never really thought about that until I read it, and since then it's always stayed with me, of how children can have tantrums and they can go off and get upset, but they just come back to that place of just happiness, joy, creativity, just naturally, very quickly.
Yeah, they do. My youngest is 3, and his new thing is, I'm not going to be your friend anymore. So it's like, you know, he just goes, like he got mad at my husband and I for something the other day. He goes to my daughter, I'm not going to be mommy and daddy's friend anymore. And he like wouldn't look at us, you know, but it lasts for like 30 seconds. Like a minute later, it's like, come here, give me a hug. And he just runs over and gives you a huge hug. It's like, I thought you weren't going to be my friend anymore. And he just laughs at himself. It's like no one wants to be in that kind of place. No one wants to hold thought in their mind and hold grudges and feel that way, and none of us do. Even as adults, no one wants to feel that. It's just that for kids, they almost can't. They couldn't if they wanted to, and as adults, we've gotten so used to kind of living in our heads a little bit more that unfortunately we've learned how to hold on to thought a little more. So we actually can hold grudges if we want to, for longer periods of time. And it's kind of cool to see that kids can't even do it, even if they try.
And it occurs to me that wouldn't the world be a better place if we all embodied a bit more of that childlike letting go of grudges and things that don't feel too good.
And I think just understanding a little bit, even just a tiny bit about how thought works makes that much easier. It makes it much more likely. When you see that thought moves, when like it does for the kids, they're always getting pushed back to that natural well-being kind of place. And it takes some effort to hold on to thought. I don't think it feels like that necessarily when you get older and you get really caught up in your head. But as soon as you see that it is that way, you start to see it. I can see that, when you have moments of prolonged anger or prolonged emotion, there is a part of you that's really looking at it and almost holding on to it in a sense. So it's just even a little bit of understanding of how that works, I think, helps people so much.
Well, thanks, Amy. We've pretty much run out of time now, but it's flown by. Are there any kind of final things you'd like to share, or?
I think this has been such a great conversation. I hope it's been helpful for people, especially thinking about relationships that can be really kind of complex and difficult, and I don't know, the thing that really stands out for me of kind of what we talked about is a great reminder. It's just sort of remembering that it is natural to us to let thought go, to not hold on to things, even to feel compassion for people. That's what's natural. So anytime we see that we're not there, it's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just being a normal human being if you're not there. But it's an invitation to kind of see, okay, I have stuff on my mind. And like we were saying, you don't push that away. You can't sink it to the ground, but you just kind of step back and see, all right, I have some stuff on my mind, and when this clears, I'm going to know it. I'm going to feel a lot different about this, and things are going to look different. Just being in the groove of that very, very natural, completely natural and effortless cycle is really, really helpful.
Great. If people wanted to find out more, if they wanted to get hold of you, how might they do that?
You can go to my website. It's dramyjohnson.com. It's just dramyjohnson.com. And I write a new article every Thursday. I have all kinds of free resources and all kinds of stuff there. You can sign up for my mailing list, and I send out that article and things like that. Helpful information around relationships and other topics and stuff every week. So that would be the best way.
And your book is available on Amazon, and I'm sure at all good bookshops.
Yeah. Being Human is available now. Yeah.
Fantastic. And for anyone who wants to get hold of me, you can do so via my website, which is www.ankushjain.co.uk. You can subscribe there for details whenever the new podcasts come out and everything else that I'm up to. And it's got links to my Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and everything else. So thank you very much, Amy. And I'll look forward to speaking to the listeners next time. This was the Relationship Series podcast. If you like this episode, please share it and leave us your feedback online. Thanks for listening.